Hey, this is Ryan from Sunlux.
This is Ian from Sunlux, and you're listening to the LSQ podcast.
What's up? It's Jenny LSQ. Thanks for pressing play on episode 86 of the LSQ podcast, in which I talk with two of the three members of the experimental trio Sunlux, Ian Chang and Ryan Lott. And Sunlux's music is featured in the incredible film Everything Everywhere All at Once, and like that film, it is nominated for multiple Academy Awards. The beautiful end credits tune, which is co-written with Mitski and David Byrne, who perform the duet, is nominated for Best Original Song, and Sunlux's score is nominated in the score category. And I just love the movie so much, I can't stop thinking about it, so it was cool to get to hear from those guys how they've had this layered reaction to it themselves, and also to learn more about Sunlux's history, which we do in this episode. Let's go. Yeah, it's good to see y'all. I know it's been a super busy time, so I appreciate you carving out room in your calendars for this, because we are, listeners, in the throes of a series of activities surrounding a really big moment for Sunlux and for any musician. Multiple nominations for Academy Awards connected to Everything Everywhere All at Once, for which they composed the music. So how are we feeling, dudes?
There's, I feel like, different phases of processing. It's definitely very real. I think, especially this past weekend, we were just at the BAFTA, and it kind of broke the fourth wall, I think was a term that Rafiq used. And yeah, I'm just feeling very grateful and honored to be having the work that we put into this movie celebrated like this. And it's only going to enable us to do more film work, and I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, did you have a sense at the outset that it was going to become such a huge part of your lives?
I think pretty quickly I realized that it was going to be a big project, like a very ambitious project that was going to take over our lives insofar as just like we'd be working on it for a long time. Once I started to get a sense of how much music was going to be in the movie, and how much of it was going to be score. But definitely, I don't think anybody had any expectation or thought that it was going to kind of connect with the world in the way that it has. I don't know. That's something that I think I can honestly say I don't think anyone really expected that, and it's a beautiful thing. It's kind of like, by the time we finished working on it, we were so deep inside of it that it was really difficult to tell how it was going to read, because it is quite chaotic and some, and it's very maximal, and it throws a lot at the viewer. So I don't think I had a great concept of exactly how it was going to read with fresh eyes.
I think I can also say, just speaking for myself, that I didn't really have a grasp of the film myself for a while. You know, it's not non-linear, but it's it's making these leaps across universes and establishing a complexity of character and of narrative through those leaps. And each moment is its own musical task. So it was hard not to get really focused in on tiny pieces of the film and hold on to the broader perspective. And that's one of the ways in which Daniels were essential to our process. They knew their film so well, they knew exactly what it needed. And when we felt inundated or blurry-eyed, they always had such great direction for us to both accomplish the task at hand, but also do so in a way that keeps everything else in mind, so that we, in the end, could create a cohesive story together.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard agree that you can't really anticipate a film like this and just be like, oh yeah, I got you. Yeah, it's one of those, or so,
Yeah.
it's just like, and then you're like, I didn't expect it to fuck me up that hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so many things about its, unconventionality that are part of what make it, so great. And if you're listening and you haven't yet seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, please stop listening to this podcast. go for your own sake, go do it.
You know what I'm realizing now, Ian? I feel like the emotional aspect of this movie kind of like crept up on all of us. Did you feel that way?
Hmm.
Like as we were working on it, I felt like it got more and more like emotional for me at least. I'll just speak for myself. Like there was a
Totally. Yeah.
maybe I just like I really was able to like start to give into it, but yeah, I mean I had, teary moments for sure near the beginning of the process, but I feel like by the end of the process I was just like getting ravaged, like
Yeah.
watching a scene for the 127th time. I'm not sure
Yeah.
why it happened to me like that, but
There's something about it that like kind of builds up. I mean, I think the first time I watched down like the rough cut with temp music, like I teared up at the Laundry and Taxes Wayman's speech for sure. But like, yeah, the more I watch it and worked on it and everything, and then once it was out, having seen it a few times at a few different screenings, it like kind of almost like builds up on itself. Like I remember like the second or third time I watched the movie down in a theater, I was just like, oh wow, like now I'm feeling like all kinds of sad like in the first part of the movie, which like I didn't used to feel at all. But now that like I'm like so invested in all these characters, it's like just kind of compounds.
There's a lot of sweet humor and action to distract from the emotion behind it, and so that's I think it kind of creeps up on you. And separate from that, obviously, we love this film. All of us in this conversation love this film and have feel a deep connection to it. Me, even just as a viewer, I'm curious on that tip. Like, give me an example of something from your childhood that you can, whether it's a movie or music or something, a creative thing that you consumed that you loved that much.
Something that's interesting, I think, is there are few kind of artists and or records that like ended up being very pivotal for me, but it wasn't the type of thing where I was like the first time I heard it, it was like the clouds parted. I think in a lot of cases, actually, it's the opposite, where I think the first time I heard Radiohead, for example, was like at an HMV, which is like a Tower Records, and this is in Hong Kong, and they have like the listening stations. I was like, oh, this is an interesting album cover, so I listened to it, and I was just like, I don't know what the heck is going on at all. Not really sure how to feel about that. Like, gonna put it down. But then, like after
What album? What album would that have
that
been?
was Kid A, probably 2000. I don't know when that came out. Let's say around
One around
2001.
one.
something like that. Yeah, yeah. I remember feeling the same way about like Miles Davis Bitches Brew. I remember feeling the same way about the first time I heard Deerhoof. I was just like, I don't know if I like this, but then somehow I would like give it another chance and another chance, and then those are the things that like maybe challenged like what I thought to be good and beautiful or something. And like a lot of my sort of like big kind of things that influenced me a lot have been things that I've had to like almost like live with and let it kind of affect me like over a course of time.
Yeah, and so but at that point, I'm guessing what you're like around 12 or 13 or something. You're in the HMV, you're listening to Kid A on the
Yeah.
headphones. Were you creative yet yourself then? What was sort of the context for this? What kind of was there anyone in your life who was introducing you to weird music or weirder art?
I was already my first instrument was a piano, so I was kind of like taking piano lessons. I was taking some drum lessons at that point at 12. Mostly that side of things was all kind of like classical training and like almost in an academic realm in my brain, although it was like stuff that I really enjoyed doing. And then in terms as a listener, that was what I did is I just went to HMV and I listened to like a bunch of the stations. And I think even at that point, I was already like listening to like very far flung different things. Like I think I was like a big fan of like pop punk at that age, but I was also a big fan of like Ibiza mixes, but I like didn't even know like where that was or what that was, you know? I was just like listening to like these like kind of dance mixes and stuff.
That's
And
hilarious.
going around HMV, I'd also like there was a Jeff Buckley like retrospective thing. And I like listened to that and was like blown away. So it was like a lot of like just kind of random almost influences from being kind of listening to like all these different stations at the place where you used to go buy CDs, which is like such a like a fossil kind of like thing to even talk about as an experience.
Kid A might have been late. That might have been late 2000 for you because it actually came out in October of 2000. Man, two of the greatest records ever made came out that year. Voodoo and Kid A. Two very different records, but both I remember so vividly. Like the first moment I heard them, being just like, I'm dating myself, but I'm definitely older than Ian. And when I heard those, I was ready to hear them.
Yeah, Ryan, tell me what was so go back a little to baby Ryan though. What was your Kid A on the headphones at HMV?
I think for me it was one of my first jobs, or actually my very first job. I worked at a media play. It's like a kind of like a Borders or a Barnes and Noble or something like that, you know. And I worked in the music department, which was basically just like CDs and tapes. I would, on my breaks, I would stay in the building and just sit and listen to the different records that way. I guess how I discovered Ray Charles, who went on to be like one of my favorite artists as a teenager. I actually got to see him live 3 times, which is insane. I don't actually, but as a kid, I'm trying to think. I definitely had I definitely loved like I guess as I was young, I loved Elton John's Candle in the Wind. I remember that was like the first. I remember being like so emotional listening to that song and not knowing why.
That's awesome.
I think was a really important lesson.
Why do I feel this way?
Yeah, it's a really cool life lesson, and as a maker, just to realize that there's so many aspects of what we do that permeate past our our cerebral cortex and into I'm
Yeah, but I mean, I'm curious though. Did kid you think, no, wait, as the Seinfeld goes, what is this salty discharge? Like did the kid you go like, no, really, I don't even know what the song is about. Why am I? Was it a thing that you were prone to analyze even at that point? Was whether it was that or whether Ray Charles, like, were you already kind of getting the kind of brain of like, what is it about this and why do I like it so much? Who am I?
Yeah, I mean, I started making music, my own music, like as maybe like by the time I mean, actually, my parents started me in piano lessons a little earlier than my siblings because I was already starting to play on the piano, like making up songs. And so I would have been like 5 or 6, which is crazy because I have a 6-year-old right now. It's just like I'm crazy to think about. Yeah, so I mean, I had a very emotional connection to music, whether it was like super cheesy, like Richard Marx, or some of the names of people I can't even remember, but they're like.
Are you talking about Bryan Adams? Just say Bryan Adams.
Bryan Adams, yeah, Bryan Adams. What was that song Bryan Adams did? It was a big one.
Well, everything I do it for.
I definitely learned how to play that on the piano. Actually, the first one, I think maybe the first thing I learned how to play on the piano, I taught myself, was the theme to Top Gun.
Oh, damn. I don't think I know how that goes. So you didn't grow up in New York. Where is this early?
In Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. Yeah.
Right. Talk me through the next phase of your parents started you on the piano lessons early and you're already kind of beginning to write songs. Like, how did that evolve into something that was for you began to feel very serious? And where, what did you do next?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually just reconnected with my piano teacher from when I was 11. I started when I was 11 with her. She was my second piano teacher. My parents entered me into this like young composers competition at Yale, or just like was hosted by Yale. And one of the adjudicators who taught at Yale and also at Wesleyan, the way I think it probably really happened, she tells it like she was very impressed and took me on as her student. But I think what really happened is my mom bribed her. So she took me on as a student.
Wait, really? You think so?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine this woman who taught at Yale. She's a professor of piano and composition. Like she's not gonna like see this 11-year-old kid and be like, oh, I want to like teach this kid piano and composition. But
sure, it wasn't like, oh my God, he's a genius.
I don't think so. She told the story in when I spoke to her a couple weeks ago. She told it like that, but I think she was just being generous. She might
Give me your number. I'm gonna call her and ask her the hard-hitting questions.
have. Anyway, I started studying with her, which is really cool and totally weird because I was going to music school, like a college. I was going to Wesleyan every week to, this little kid in like penny loafers, like showing up like he's dressed like he's coming out of Sunday school, going into this like college campus. It felt very weird, and but it was awesome. I realized in retrospect how special that opportunity was, to get like some really serious training. But there was a moment, and I had the pleasure of recounting this to her the other day. There was a moment where she said, we're sitting at the piano, and she's like, Ryan, you're not practicing. Why are you not practicing? You're wasting your mom's money. You're wasting my time. Like, and I remember just kind of telling her, I don't know, it's just not fun anymore. And she looked me dead in my 12-year-old eyes and said, at some point, you're going to have to decide for yourself whether you want more from music than just fun.
Whoa. Damn.
Wow.
And I mean, turns out I did.
Wow, intense. And I wonder, I mean, yeah, do you remember sort of how 11, 12-year-old you took that? I mean, like, yeah, did it hit you then?
I knew it. I knew she was fucking right. I knew she was right, because it was my young brain and person that didn't want to practice because it wasn't fun. But it was like my, ageless infinite spirit that was screaming for a deeper experience of this mystical, magical thing called music.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so you knew already then, you knew that you were like this is a very special thing for me. And moving forward, as you seem like the kind of person who, when you get into something, you maybe get really, really into it potentially.
No, I mean, really only like that with music. I don't really have any other hobbies. I'm very obsessed with music, and usually when I'm doing something really fun and exciting and awesome, I'm like kind of still wish I was home making music.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm not obsessive about anything but anything else.
What did that look like as a teenager? Once you entered the truly unequivocally obsessed phase, how did that play out?
Well, I had to give up soccer. And I really liked playing soccer my whole life. I'd played it as a kid. I was good at it, but I had to give that up because it was just not, it was like I had to, choose. I didn't really through high school, and I just, my only friends were my bandmates. I had a band in school. I had like a girlfriend, and I had my band, and that was enough. And so I had a very small number of friends, and then I went to college, and then kind of just like repeated that process of just finding an incredible little collection of musicians and spending all my time that way, all the time that I had that wasn't in the practice room because I went to music school. So
When did you begin expanding and learning other instruments? How quickly did that kind of start to happen?
well, that started happening actually earlier on because I was playing in bands growing up. So I'd like pick up the guitar or like sit at the drums, and like we'd, when you're kids, like everybody's kind of sucks equally. And you just kind of go to the thing that you kind of suck less at. So, I started learning the guitar, and my sister had one in the closet, and drums. I like through high school, I could always like do hand percussion pretty easily and stuff. And in a way that was convincing. My skills as a pianist were porting into other places, with relative ease. But I didn't really do any official training on any other instruments until college. And interestingly, the only other instrument I have training in formally is voice, which is really funny.
And Ian, tell me a bit about for you as you started to recognize, like, now I'm obsessed with music. I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it out of love. How did your music fandom and your performance of music and your kind of arsenal of what you could do, how did that expand?
I would say in high school, I went to a boarding school in New Jersey. So I was kind of like moved away from home. And at that point, I was already pretty into music. Back in Hong Kong, I was doing like this like junior program at the Academy for Performing Arts. And like it was kind of like, you know how when you're in school, your identity can be kind of built around like the thing that you do, you know? And so that was already like solidly where I was at in middle school. But then in high school, it got more serious. I discovered a lot of different kinds of music, moving to the States, and became very obsessed. I didn't have a band in high school. Actually tried to have a band in middle school. We like kind of got it together. No one was really that serious about it, except for me.
And what was the music you were listening to at that point when you were in boarding school?
Boarding school, I went through a pretty big like classic rock phase, and that's probably also like when I spent the most of my time. Like I taught myself how to play guitar, and that had a lot to do with it. You know, trying to learn how to play kind of Led Zeppelin songs, AC/DC songs, and stuff like that. And at the same time, the library there had like a really good collection of jazz, so I started getting into that and then joining kind of the jazz ensemble at school and all of that. And then I was also interested in like joining the choir, so I was kind of doing every possible like musical extracurricular in school, and that structure really kind of helped me, and it also helped me kind of make friends and meet people in a new country that with a new culture. Music in a lot of ways was also like a helpful way for me to kind of connect with people.
When did you first start to see the kind of music that interested you to play as being more experimental? What made you sort of realize or be attracted to more out of the box kind of music?
That's an interesting question. I think maybe the more I listened to and kind of was digesting, the more I found myself looking for something different. And there was like the choral director at the school at the time. He was really great, like teacher, and also had a class that was just like a music listening class, which was super cool. And I was turned on to a lot of things in that class. And he also asked people from the class to bring in things to listen to.
So you would listen,
That's so
listen.
rad.
Yeah, the class was you sit there for 2 hours and you listen to what full albums or selections of songs, and then everyone discusses it.
We would go like album by album, and I remember we did like Dark Side of the Moon, and there were like some things that like he was particularly into that he would share with us, like XTC, and I think we did listen to some Radiohead, and yeah, we would just listen to a song and then talk about it like afterwards, you know, everyone's impressions of it, and both like sort of critically, but also just like emotionally. And that was a really, really cool thing that was like a class that he put that into practice at the school. And so that was also one way in which I was kind of like learning how to listen to music and think about music through the lens of more than just like, oh, I like this or I don't like this. It's like why, and like, you know, what are the aspects that you like about it and what don't you like about it, and maybe, you know, deeper kind of reflection on what taste means, you know, and what makes something timeless versus not timeless and things like that.
And Ryan, what about you? When did you start to feel like, love for Bryan Adams aside, that you were starting to gravitate toward more, more unconventional music?
In high school, I started studying. My parents moved and they found me another really great teacher, super rad weirdo, who was a student at Bernstein. And he really introduced me to, I wasn't really listening to classical music, but I was studying it. But I was already listening to a lot of music that was not like what all the other kids were listening to, pretty much just like listening to, like I said, Ray Charles and Tower of Power and P-Funk and Prince, like nonstop, like definitely like a very funk based palette.
A funk-based curriculum?
Pretty much. I mean, it's like all I listened to. It was like because I was in a funk band, and it was just like that's what I was learning, some of the rudiments of jazz, but like definitely through the lens of the funk aesthetic. But then on the other side of my brain, I was like, something about my European classical music was like starting to catch on in my brain. And then I met this dude who became my teacher, Jay Hinson, and he was like me. He loved all kinds of music, but his music like was way broader. His appreciation for it was way broader. So he actually kind of rescued me from becoming a classical like nerd, like a kid that was like a snob, because I could really go that way because I was really becoming very good at the piano. And I was starting to look down at pop music because it wasn't like, again, I wasn't listening to, pop music. I was like listening to souls and this weird classical stuff. And so, but he started to introduce me to like some amazing music. And I think the music that hit me the hardest that he introduced me to was the music of Bartók, the Hungarian composer, 20th century composer Bartók. Well, a piece of music from 1937, music for strings, percussion, and celeste, was a piece that when I heard it was the first one, along with Concerto for Orchestra, which was on the same album that he let me borrow. And it was that record that was like where I started to hear like these crazy sounds coming out of the orchestra, and these things that felt furious and full of like angst and anguish, but also kind of like these wild rhythms that felt like so adventurous. And that's the first time I feel like I heard the orchestra. I heard the potential for the orchestra to do something far beyond the box that I had put it in. And I think that was important for me because it showed me that it wasn't so much the tools, it was how you use the tools, and that maybe the delineations between music that I was forming in my head should disappear. And he helped me in that way a lot, because he was like showing me about some really incredible craftsmanship in pop music that I had looked over. And
he blew your mind with Kiss from a Rose.
Kiss from a
right?
Rose. He's like helped me like pull apart that song, that Seal song. It's like the way its construction, the way it's designed, and all these like twists and turns, the harmonic structure, the melodic structure. Such an amazing, and it's so hard to make a piece of music that's like such an earworm, and yet that contradicts so many of the impulses that you'd have melodically and harmonically. Anyway, so and Peter Gabriel was another big one. Sting, these like icons of adventurous pop music, make pop and rock music. Yes, David Byrne, Brian Eno.
And Ryan, talk me through some of the kind of early years of Sonlux, and of kind of playing the music that led you to start the Sonlux project in these years before you had hooked up with Ian and Rafiq.
Actually, it wasn't playing music that led to it. It was just making and listening to music. I wasn't playing after college. I stopped playing. I actually moved. I made my way with my wife, because I got married right out of college, to Cleveland to help start up a modern dance company that actually is still around, which is really cool. But I knew no other professional musicians. For 6 years, I was the only musician I knew. And it was actually in that context that I made the Sonlux record. Kind of in most of that work was there in Cleveland, just working out of my attic in an attempt to kind of write what I wanted to hear. That was one of the primary goals of the project, because it was just like what I did when I wasn't doing work, when I wasn't writing, music for this dance company or helping produce other people's projects, or helping to mix other people's projects, because I used to mix people as well.
I want to linger for a minute too on the dance thing, because obviously that's an important part of your arsenal and of your career. Because I didn't, and tell me a little bit more about this. So you moved there to start the dance company, and was the idea built into that you would be composing music for the choreography?
Yeah. It was like a twofer. My wife is a dancer, and so the company hired both of us, and so we moved together to be there, work for pennies, but like basically do something that was really rewarding creatively. And that's how I really cut my teeth with respect to my production style, which was originally based on having a profoundly minimal number of tools, and with those tools developing as kaleidoscopic a sound as I could possibly create, and meet the demands of each dance uniquely without having a unique set of tools for each demand. So that was an really important stage of my creative development. And it's really in that context that I developed much of the aesthetic that would go on to define the Sonlux project. The original plan was I was going to find people on MySpace who could sing. the first piece of music that went on to become a Son Lux song, I had started as a piece of music for this dance company called Inlet Dance Theater. And I even remember now the name of the piece was Ascension, which is a cool thing to start the beginning of a like life defining creative endeavor. That piece of music went on to become the song Weapons from the first Son Lux record. And that was the first, so officially the first piece of first Son Lux song I ever started writing. So that was in October of 2004. It was a long time ago.
Still slaps.
Still slaps.
Did you have an explicit idea when you were starting the Son Lux project? And as you said, there was stuff you wanted to hear that you weren't hearing. Can you describe what that was, or what some of the foundational kind of concepts were for what this music would be?
Yeah, that first record, I was really interested in reconciling a lot of my urges that came from the part of my brain that went to music school and learned a lot about different kinds of ways of thinking about music and approaching music that was quite analytical, but also really like fascinating. Reconciling that part of my brain with the part of my brain that just loved to listen to boom bap and to soul music and to Ciaros, Radiohead, like my listener brain and my writing brain, felt like they were often at odds. And I felt like it was just because like the music that there is some music that theoretically that can accommodate like both of these sides of my brain. I eventually realized that it's not really binary in that way, but I was thinking of myself in that way. And so that was a primary thrust of the project. Conceptually, I was also really interested in whether or not I could abandon binary form, song form, which is like first chorus, and still make a pop record. And I was going to lean into these non-pop conventions to introduce the kind of dramaturgy necessary to make the song interesting. So I was basically working with chants, CHANTS, singular little fragments of text.
Not serendipity chants, y'all.
But I actually was working with aleatory as well, which is chants. That was one of the concepts that CHANCE that I was also experimenting with, and that came from the part of my brain that I went to music school. So I mean, it was kind of like all of the things that I hadn't yet quite had an opportunity to either hear or make. I just found myself doing those things, and I was also learning, how to make music with a computer. I'm a pianist, and I went to school for composition, and it was like a very conservative school. And it was like, this was a long time ago. This is, I graduated in 2001. And so the tools that were readily available with respect to making, music were very limited, especially, and I had I just had no money. So I spent most of my time sampling classical music CDs from the library, and then trying my best through pastiche to make music that way. Every single day I went onto macmusic.org looking for freeware, and that's how I learned to make music, and somehow it turned into the first Son Lux record, which took like 3 years to make. It was a very slow process, and I did get a couple different important grants along the way that enabled me to kind of get some more tools, and that was really an essential part as well. So I had help.
Yeah, and I mean, over those first few albums, obviously, it sounds like you started it with the idea that no pressure. It was going to be another outlet for stuff that you weren't doing for the dance company. And then, I mean, out of the gate, it did pretty well. So, I mean, Son Lux pretty quickly established a reputation.
Yeah, my manager connected me to a label that had a great reputation. It was called Anticon Records, and that was cool because it had an aesthetic connection to hip hop, which is one of the things that I wanted to make sure I maintained. And my manager, Michael, is still with us. He's still our primary manager of Son Lux. So he's been there since the beginning. So he connected me to Anticon. I put that record out, but then it did well, but I couldn't tour it or anything like that. I wound up getting a job in New York, though, through making that record. An old friend of mine basically used it as an excuse to introduce my music to his bosses, and I got hired for ads. It was a post house, so I was writing music for ads on the daily. That was my day job. and I couldn't tour. And then Robin Hilton at NPR, who loved the first record and included it among his year-end best ofs, he hit me up in January of 2010, no, 2011, and he said, NPR is doing this coverage of this phenomenon called RPM Challenge, which is a thing that songwriters have starting to do en masse, where they give themselves 1 month to finally get off their couch and make the music that they've been wanting to make. The idea is you make an album in a month, and it's the shortest month of the year, interestingly. So we were over at NPR, we're thinking of who made a really good record but hasn't made another record in a long time, and who could we encourage to make a record, and then give them an outlet for promoting it by documenting the process. And I forwarded it to Michael, and I was like, interesting, and he said, you have to do this. I said, this, I'm not going to do it. This is crazy. There's no way I'm doing it. It's like, no, you're going to do this. So that's what I did. I made an album, my second album, We Are Rising, in the month of February 2011, and I did it. I released it in March. Then the third record, though, is the third record I also made relatively slowly. I started it in New York, but then finished it in California. My wife and I moved to Orange County for her to go back to school to get her master's, and I did most of the Lanterns record out of a kind of a student housing apartment complex, the most ridiculous place where everybody's like constantly grooming their lawns. You know what I did though? I went to IKEA and I bought a bunch of cabinets or wardrobes, and I shrunk my room. I lined the two outside walls with cabinets. And I went to Home Depot and I stuffed them with R19 up above and below. And then I put ropes with because of earthquakes and stuff, I put hooks, like a system of ropes and hooks in the wall to hold them against the wall in case they started to shake. And then I installed track curtains in front of them. So I literally made a makeshift two walls full of insulation, so that I could have a quiet space.
I never knew that. That's crazy.
And I made lanterns in that room pretty much. And then I moved back to New York. My wife was already in New York at the time because she'd gotten another job dancing back in New York. I had to drove across the country. And I remember I drove from Indianapolis to New York City that day with my dog on release day, 13 and a half hour drive. And I got to Brooklyn, grabbed a 6-pack at the bodega, and went up to meet Jen in our new empty apartment on Classen. And we drank a couple beers and slept on the floor of an empty apartment. That was my rock star album release day. Lanterns, which went on to become the really pivotal record for me and for my career, to get me to a place where I could tour. And then once I was able to pull the trigger and tour, that's when I lucked out and met my best friends, Ian Chang and Rafiq Bhatia. And it was in the context of trying to form a band that could just go out and play some shows. And in the end, it was like, nah, let's just do this for real.
Yeah. So how did it wasn't MySpace at that point that you were using to find, how did you find Ian and Rafiq? And what was it that at that point, having been able to have this incarnation of it that was just you, what was it other than, proficiency, but what were you looking for in your collaborators?
Yeah, I had already started working with Rafiq. He actually plays on the song Easy on Lanterns. We had some mutual friends, and there was some discussion about trying to maybe play a show together. His music that he was making by his solo project, it was super awesome. And when I first heard it, I was like, he was really different as a musician than I was, but also there were certain things about his music that I was completely in sync with. And I felt like we had this kind of symbiosis and shared DNA that was really fascinating. And I immediately was I just have to figure out how to start working with this guy, So I invited him to be a part of my first film score, which Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby. And then I was doing a collaborative project called Sisyphus, or go on to become called Sisyphus, with Serengeti and Sufjan Stevens. I invited him to be part of that. So he plays on 2 songs on that record. And then, so when it came time, I got back to New York and he was in New York. So I was like, yo, I want to go on tour. Would you consider like going out on the road with me? I know the music is not guitar based, but it didn't really worry me because one of the things that I could clearly see and hear in Rafiq's, music and his playing was that he wasn't really just thinking about music through the lens of his instrument. And so that was a super high priority for me, is like, if I'm going to find, even as a live bandmate, I was committed to the idea that this person, whoever it is, needed to be like, help me produce creatively, have a sort of higher tier creative role in bringing the music to life for stage. I knew I needed a drummer, so I wanted a drummer that had ideas for me as a programmer and a vocalist, and I wanted a guitarist that had ideas for the drummer, and I knew it had to be that way in order to like create something cohesive, because the album was never designed to be done live, and so it was going to require sort of ground up rethinking of things. And so I enlisted Rafiq, and then I was like, you got to help me find, we basically need like 2 more people, or we can find a drummer who can basically be 2 people, play electronics and drums at the same time. And I basically tasked Rafiq with, because I didn't know anybody, I basically tasked Rafiq with solving the hardest problem there was. And Ian can tell you how he came into the picture.
So we actually have Facebook to thank instead of MySpace. So Rafiq and I had played music together before and also shared bills in the past. So we sort of tangentially knew each other, but I was on the road a bunch around that time, and it's not like we were like close or anything, but there was a mutual respect for sure. And he was trying to think of a drummer, and I hadn't come to mind yet until I think I like either commented on or hearted like a photo he posted from DeFara's Pizza in Brooklyn. And yeah, it was a photo of pizza on Facebook, and that's what brought us together.
What would you say is kind of the most different about the way Sunlux approaches, whether it's shows or whether it's recording? What has changed the most since this trio incarnation of the band began?
I think that the way that as a band we approach kind of sculpting sound comes from a very sort of, we love like in particular kind of exaggerating things that are natural or acoustic in a way that sounds hyper real or something like that. And it is something that in its own approach as like something that is done, when you process audio and you like chop things up and done like on a computer, but all of that kind of has over the course of our life as a band has fed its way back into the way we approach our instruments and the way we play them. And as a result, we're kind of embracing more and more sort of just capturing like the act of playing our instruments and then letting that kind of take the lead.
Ryan, what would you say is sort of the most different about Sunlux in 2023?
Probably that we're all Oscar nominated composers. Which is like, I mean, yeah, that's not what we expected. And
whoops.
We've just been so fortunate to have consistently made music together, and music that we feel very proud of, and that has been the result of our continual exploration, personally and collectively. I mean, we're so fortunate that we can say that. We've just spent the last 10 years making music we really love and with people we really love, and being part of things we are very proud of. And this movie is sort of the culmination of those efforts in a way, because the Daniels were drawn to us through our work, just doing what we love to do, making cool things that we like with people we like, which is Daniel Scheinert's motto. That's what we were doing, and it caught their ear. And at least in this universe, it was the perfect pairing for their crazy film. blessings upon blessings. We had the blessing to arrive to say that it was true, that this is how we operated. And then as a result, we received more blessings, which is participating in such a integral way in this film. To now feel celebrated with these nominations is, it's like unfair. It's not fair. So many great things compounding over time. And yeah, it's crazy.
Well, I'm so happy for you guys about all of it. I very much look forward to hearing what music you guys make, impelled forward by this kind of universe reinforcing doing what you do. So
thank you so much.
All right. Well, big thanks again to Sunlux's Ryan Lott and Ian Chang, and best of luck to them. I'm really rooting for Sunlux at the Oscars, which are another week and a half away if you're listening to this when it's just come out. And thanks again for doing that. Also, I hope you'll consider digging into some of the other 85 episodes of LSQ, which you can find at jennylsq.com. And you can find me on most social platforms at jennylsq. Hit me up if you've got a question or feedback. I'll talk to you next time.